And we're back with the final session. Our end of day keynote today is being delivered by Heidi Kirby, instructional designers and leading projects. I'm going to get straight out of the way and I'm going to come back at the end just to do a bit of a close down for the day. But Heidi, the stage is yours.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. I'm really excited to share the outcome of my research and what was, oh gosh, I think it ended up being 5.5 years of PhD studies, and of that, like 2 years was research. So we're just going to jump right in and go through. I don't have a ton of slides, and I didn't go through, like, I'm not going to go through some of the really boring kind of academic stuff. I'll give you a link at the end of the presentation that includes my actual dissertation, so you can go ahead and see it if you want. But we'll just jump right in and we'll talk a little bit first about the study. So what was I trying to find out with this? Well, I wanted to find out what leadership skills are needed for IDs who lead projects within their organization or with clients if they work as a freelancer. So anybody who's in charge of taking that project from needs analysis to implementation. And then I also wanted to find out where instructional designers felt that they got those skills. And then that way, I just wanted to cover just that little bit to begin with, because then that way, future research could look at how do we build these skills in L&D teams? How do we make IDs more promotable and, be able to promote them into leadership positions? Because the whole reason this even came about was because I found that there wasn't enough opportunity for instructional designers to move up into leadership roles. And it started with me, right? I was in an instructional design role for a couple of years, and there was an opening on my team for a senior ID, not even a manager yet, but a senior ID that my boss was eventually going to promote to a manager position. And that person would eventually take her place as the director of the entire team. And I showed an interest in that. And I had told her like that's something I wanted. And she said that I couldn't even apply for it because I didn't have enough leadership experience. I'd never had that title. And so I hit a dead end pretty quickly on. And then I started meeting all these L&D managers as I kind of job hopped. And none of them had a background in L&D. Like a majority of them didn't have a background in L&D. Some of them had, a background in product or HR, or, they came from all over the place. But there was a distinct, there's kind of a distinct lack of a funnel for IDs to become leaders. And then the research that I started to look into and the research that I started to uncover and see showed that there was a lot of it was looking at competencies through the lens of job postings, right? And what we know about job postings, if you've ever looked for a job in ID, you probably have seen this, is that a lot of those things are copied and pasted, number one. You can look at current ID jobs and still find mentions of Flash and things like that. But also, a lot of it's based on what I dubbed as desired traits. So like what the hiring managers think are the skills needed, not necessarily what's needed in practice. And so I wanted to talk to actual instructional designers to figure out what they were doing on the job, but also because everyone else's research had to do with very academic settings. And I've always been trying to better bridge the relationship between theory and practice in L&D, right? Because we have a lot of theory and we have a lot of practitioners, and a lot of times those folks are kind of in opposition. And so I wanted to kind of say, okay, let me talk to people who are doing the actual work to help contribute to the theory on competencies. And then the last thing, which Tom and I talked about briefly before I came on here, is that there are so many opinion-based competencies being posted out on social media. These are the skills that you need to learn as an instructional designer. You need to learn Chat GPT and, AI and VR. And there's just all of these skills that people are just putting out there based on what they're selling, what they're promoting, or even just very limited experience. Like somebody is like, oh, here's the skills that you need from my first 6 months as an ID, right? Or here's the skills that I think you need leading an ID team, even though I haven't been an ID myself in 20 years, right? So I really wanted to talk to the people doing the work and figure out what they were doing. So I interviewed 25 instructional designers, and all I did was I asked them to tell me about a successful and an unsuccessful project that they worked on. Most of the people were from the United States. There were a few people from other countries. I talked to people from different backgrounds. There were people of different ages, different genders. The only requirement that I had was that they had 3 years experience as an instructional designer. And I did that because I wanted them to be able to really have good judgment about what was a successful versus an unsuccessful project. So I wanted them to have a little bit of experience seeing multiple projects to be able to tell their story. But I covered a wide range of industries. I didn't have any kind of limitations on where they could come from. So I talked to people who were in corporate, higher ed, the health and medical field, freelance, the government, nonprofit, and the projects that they talked about. Those successful and unsuccessful projects that they talked about were were all over the place, right? People talked online courses, instructor-led training, hybrid learning, technology implementation. Some people were creating interactive learning guides. The amount of differentiated work was great. Like it was a really great wide range of projects that people were working on. And so to skip all of my methodology, again, you can read it in my actual dissertation if you're interested, but I'm going to skip ahead to the findings. So what did I find out? The top behaviors. Now, what I did first was I looked for just behaviors that were present in successful projects and then behaviors that were present in unsuccessful. And they actually matched really well. And I can talk a little bit about that here. But 84% of people said that collaborating positively and communicating successfully with their subject matter experts and stakeholders was key to a successful project. 52% of the people I talked to said continuous review, multiple reviews at different steps of the project was critical for project success. 48% mentioned completing a needs analysis. So asking questions about the learning outcomes. The instructional designer getting what they need from the whole conversation. 40% mentioned some sort of project management. So managing the logistics of the project, properly setting expectations, time expectations for the SMEs, expectations about what the deliverable was going to look like, assigning different roles, leading meetings, scheduling things, hosting reviews, collecting feedback and implementing it. All sorts of these different logistical project management pieces were mentioned by 40% of the people I talked to. And then 40% of the people also mentioned gaining support. So getting buy-in from those SMEs and stakeholders, getting support for specific interventions, right? If they wanted to try something new or different, that's what they did. And alternatively, I don't have a slide on this, but I found in the unsuccessful category that a lack of communication, miscommunication was my number one reason for an unsuccessful project. Whether that be, a SME ghosting, right? That happens from time to time, or just a lack of of expectations being hit. And then not completing a needs analysis showed up there. To the scope, right? So kind of on the other side of the project management piece, the scope getting out of hand was another reason for unsuccessful projects. And then not being able to get that support. So the 5 most common behaviors I found really matched the 5 most common behaviors for unsuccessful projects. They created a good mirrored effect, which is what you want out of research, right? So what I did was then I translated these behaviors into critical leadership skills for IDs. So the ability to collaborate successfully and continuously review with SMEs and stakeholders, I combined those top 2 into this number 1, collaboration and review. Then number 2, complete a thorough needs analysis, right? There's a lot of like, I'm hearing a lot of little whispers out there on social media that like a needs analysis isn't necessary, or that you can skip it, or that you can cut corners. But honestly, from the research, from talking to the people I talked to, completing a thorough needs analysis and making sure all of your questions are answered at the beginning is key. Managing the logistics of the project, right? So being able to arrange all those things, meetings, schedule, roles, expectations, that's a huge part of what we do. And then gaining support for your plans, not just leadership support. You also have to find the people within your organization who are going to, be the change champions, right? So depending on the project, you have to find the right people within your organization who are going to help too. And I like what you say, Tom, about you can skip the needs analysis. Your work will just suck. That's 100% what I found in my research. So the next question that I asked was, the specific question that I asked was, where did you learn the skills needed to successfully complete this project? I asked it right after I asked him about the successful project. And I said, where did you learn those skills? 64% said that they learned it from doing the job, right? Doing the actual work. They figured it out over time. 32% of those people said that they learned from failing and trying again, or, trial and error. I forget, somebody put it really great. And of course, I can't remember the exact responses now. But being given the space to fail too, like that psychological safety that we talk a lot about, being given the opportunity to do something innovative and have the opportunity to fail and learn from it. 31% of participants who held an instructional design degree. So I did not require people to have an instructional design degree to talk to me. So I think about, if I recall correctly, about 2/3 of the people that I talked to did have a grad degree in instructional design or a related field like educational technology. And so of those people who had a degree, only 31% of them credited their degree as a factor in success, right? Only 31% of them equated that collaboration, that needs analysis, that project management to their degree, which I think has some pretty big implications that we'll talk about here in a second. But first, I want to just share the limitations, right? So I did all of my sampling, like I put the word out on LinkedIn. So if you didn't have a LinkedIn account, you couldn't be included in this study, right? Because you had to have a LinkedIn account, see my post, see that I was looking for people. 88% of my participants were from the United States. So very US centric. There could be future research could be done on a more global scale. And then I only took the story of the instructional designers. So I was only getting one perspective of that successful project. And I allowed the instructional designers to define success themselves. And it was important for me to clarify after the first few interviews that successful could mean that the project did never actually launch, and unsuccessful could mean that the project still launched, but that the instructional designer felt that the overall project was unsuccessful. And I had a couple of stories like that where it was like, we pushed out the course anyway, no one took it, right? So participants, this is a cool thing that I noticed. Participants were hesitant to talk about their failures. And what I did was, for half of the participants, I asked about a successful project first. And for the other half, I asked about an unsuccessful project first, just to like have a balance and not to get any bias. But even still, everyone I talked to spent about half the amount of time talking about their unsuccessful project as they did talking about their successful project, which was really interesting. And then there's also the risk that I could lead the participants in questions, so that I could try and get them to talk about specific competencies or anything. But honestly, I was just listening to stories. And there was some work that I did. I did a pilot interview. I had a friend of mine listen back to the interviews to confirm and, say, yeah, she wasn't leading the participants. And really, I just kind of let them go, and then just maybe ask some things about follow-up questions about like team makeup or due dates, or some specific like logistics that they were talking about in terms of like project management. So those are the limitations, just to be upfront and clear about it. The implications that I was talking about. So for future research, I suggested that, we look more closely at graduate education. And as Sarah said in the chat, like the ID degree is something that has a huge impact on building work-based skills. I've talked to a lot of people in ID programs outside of my research that have a lack of practical application. And like Pete's saying, the soft skills of ID, right? Like, so there's not a lot of chance to collaborate, to work with SMEs, to manage a project. It's very much learning theory, ID models, performance improvement, needs analysis. I was actually lucky enough in my program at Old Dominion to have an advanced instructional design course where we were split into groups, and we were put on real instructional design projects for nonprofits. And that was a really amazing experience, because it did dump us right into the work. We were doing the work. We were doing the project management. Like, each group was assigned a lead. And so we had to work with we had stakeholders with these nonprofits, real stakeholders. There was real work that we were doing. But I understand that that's not the norm, that Old Dominion, and to only have that as one course in 5.5 years, one piece of one semester. I think we might be missing something, right, in how we prepare grad students. And I would love to see more focus on how we can incorporate these skills into grad education, right? Also to look at a more global audience, right? Like I said, most of the people just happen to come from the United States. I didn't put that limitation on it, but most of my connections are from the US. So I'd be interested in, do these competencies resonate across the world rather than just in the US? And then suggestions for like practitioners. What are some ways that we can incorporate these skills for our teams if we lead L&D teams? What opportunities can managers start providing for people to have a safe environment to try something new, right? Like building that psychological safety. But also, are there opportunities for mentorship within your team? Are there opportunities to, have people doing the work alongside someone more senior? Because doing the work seems to be the best way for things to get done. And thanks, Kara. Thank you. It's so exciting. Kara actually has a really great paper on instructional design competencies that I reference in So I'm glad you're here, Kara. So now what I'd like to do, I didn't want to make this all about the research and everything. I want to definitely answer some questions too, but I want to take some time to just brainstorm together and make this less of me lecturing to you over slides. But I want to talk about like different areas where we can apply this research and this knowledge. So my first thought is, how can we apply this as IDs? And some of the questions I came up with are, How do you currently work with SMEs? Is that process successful for you all the time? What are the ways that you're collaborating? Yeah, of course I referenced you, Kara. What are the ways that, you know, your process is or isn't working with SMEs? Are you doing a continuous review? If not, why? Looking at just some of the different facets of how you're already working with SMEs. Are you always doing a needs analysis? And maybe that's not your role, right? I did work as an ID in a team where our boss, the L&D manager, was the one doing all the needs analysis, and then we would just be like handed an assignment, and it wouldn't be necessary because she had already done all the steps and we could trust her to do that. But is that always the case? Not necessarily. There's a lot of times where, you know, you get a manager who says, just do the thing, just make the pizza, you know. And I've always said since I first started in ID that I'm not a pizza maker. We need to do the needs analysis, right? Do you have processes in place? Do you have systems in place to get the information that you need? One thing that was really interesting to me, and I share this whenever I talk about my dissertation, is the fact that two instructional designers told me the exact same story about an unsuccessful project. And it happened, they were brought into a project, and I think in both cases it was just going to be like an e-learning course. Nothing too big, not a big deal, pretty standard fare, right, for instructional designers. And they got together with their subject matter experts and started asking questions, but they didn't really set the expectations of like why they were asking questions, what they were trying to get at. So they started asking like, do you have objectives for this? What are your goals? What are the outcomes? And the SMEs couldn't answer those questions, and they became frustrated, right? And they became so frustrated and so defensive that in these two completely different scenarios from people who maybe have never met, they were, after the meeting, the SMEs asked for that ID to be taken off the project. And in both cases, the ID was taken off the project. And that's what made it unsuccessful. And I thought that that was so interesting that I got that same story twice, right? Out of 25 random instructional designers that not collaborating successfully, not successfully communicating. Here's why I'm asking you all of these questions. You know, that was the reason why it was unsuccessful. Marnie, I love what you say in the chat that you have a spreadsheet with every section, stakeholders, audience analysis, key information, learning objectives, source contact, project timeline. All of this is really key to collaborating with your subject matter experts. But also, how do you get buy-in, right? How do you get what you want? And this slide links out to an article I wrote for our Useful Stuff website on how to get whatever you want. And I'll go ahead, again, I'll share a link. I've put together a link tree finally. And so it has the slides, and it also has a link to my dissertation. But yeah, so how can we apply this if our role is as an ID, right? And we don't have any control over the team as a whole, or we don't have any control over, you know, a grad program. I think there are still steps that we can take. And I'd love for any other ideas that you can think of to be thrown in the chat as we kind of go along too. So then how can we apply this as L&D leaders, right? And so here are some of the questions that I thought of for this. And I'd love, again, to hear your questions, your feedback in the chat as well. How can you provide more opportunities for collaboration for your team? Are you making it difficult for your instructional designers to reach out to SMEs? Do you make them go through you? Is there, you know, a certain process? I give my team full access to whoever they want, and they can reach out to whoever they want. I don't care what level that person is at the organization. And they can ask for help or, you know, review whenever they need it. It's also important, I think, as an L&D leader to make sure we don't get too many cooks in the kitchen. so that our team members can be successful in collaborating. Because you can have there is such a thing as too many SMEs or too many stakeholders, and it can, make your team really spin their wheels, right? But another question we can ask is, how can we include our team members in needs analysis? I would have loved to, as a new ID, seen that process that my boss was taking before she assigned all that work out to us, to see the process of how she prioritized, how she did needs analysis. I never got any insight to that. So even if you're a manager and you are doing the needs analysis from a bandwidth perspective or from a time perspective, how can you include your team members in just one every so often so that they can see that process and be part of it? Who drives the projects? Is it you? Are you, maybe doing a little too much and not giving your team members enough autonomy? And then how can you create that space for your team to innovate, to feel comfortable innovating, and to possibly fail, right? And I think Sarah makes a great point in the chat. We always have to sell it, like the what's in it for me. Our SMEs and stakeholders are giving us their time, right? But is what we're doing going to help make their job easier? A lot of times it's supposed to, right? Whether that be because we are helping upskill more people, or we're helping to simplify processes that they're part of. The hope is that it's a win-win, right? And then, yeah, letting the SME know how much we expect of them. And maybe we can't always give them like a hard number, but letting them know what we do, because a lot of the times they don't know what we do. They don't know. Like, I've been on so many teams where it's like, here, give me an order for a course. I'm going to take it, go into my little hidey hole, and then come out with a course. And a lot of times when that happens, the SMEs and stakeholders are like, this is not what I thought it was going to be, right? And so there's some disconnect there as well. And yeah, like I like what Pete said about the PMs putting the client in an untouchable bubble. I love everybody's suggestions here for working with SMEs. And I think that I think there's a lot of work to be done here, right? On the leadership side and on the individual instructional designer side as well, with how we interact with and collaborate with SMEs. And I think it's important to say that we're not experts in their subject matter, right? I know I said hidey hole and I realized my name's kind of in it. But yes, so how do we get that information from SMEs in the best way? And, I have a friend of mine who swears up and down that the best way is just to start meeting them, right? Like, to just meet with them and go over the things and get the information from them, and then to go ahead after they're gone and comb through it, right? And I love Sarah's suggestion, working groups. You meet every 2 weeks. There's a clear agenda. There's updates in between. My team currently uses Slack because we're like a very Slack heavy company. And so we put the Google Docs that we're working on, or the prototypes that we're working on, right in that Slack, tag the people, and that's how they add it to their workflow or their to-do list, however they keep it. But it a lot of it very much depends on the culture of your organization as well. And some SMEs have all the time in the world. When I worked at NASA, this is like the coolest thing. We had 2 SMEs on our team. That's all they did. Their job was SME. And one was like a safety engineering SME, and one was another type of engineering SME. And like, they were just there to like know things. Yeah, that's all they did. That was their role. So it was very easy to access them. But now I work in tech where everybody seems to be spread as thin as possible, right? And it's a lot harder to get reviews. So how can we best get that information? How can we best work with our SMEs? And I think one of the easiest ways is just to keep communication open and to let them know what we're doing, right? And then last but certainly not least, how can you apply this if you work in L&D in higher ed, right? If you're a professor or a mentor, how do we get more real life practice working with SMEs and stakeholders in grad programs or in mentorship programs or coaching programs for IDs, right? How can we simulate real needs analysis, or how can we send people out to do needs analysis? Here's another thing we did at Old Dominion. I had a whole course on needs analysis, and the end product was to do a needs analysis, a real needs analysis on something. But I wanted to apply it for my actual job. My professors were kind enough to like move some due dates, move some requirements to really allow me to use it as a school project and as a real project. And I don't think every grad degree program would be quite as flexible, but it was so helpful to be able to do it for real in my role and then study it at the same time and just have that you know, the theory and the practice again put together. How do we provide more resources on project management? That's a really hard thing to teach, right? Logistics of a project. How do you set it up? But it can be done, right? And it is done. It's done in other areas, just not necessarily instructional design, right? And then how do we practically prove the validity of approaches? Because we're not going to get buy-in by saying, well, random person that we work with, the literature in L&D says, nobody's going to listen to you say that, right? When you start talking about the literature, that's when people start tuning out, right? So what are the different applications for this? And that is really all I had, because I wanted to leave some time for any questions. So I would love to hear your questions. Oh, and let me throw this link. How do I post here in the chat? It's giving me trouble, Tom.
Oh, let me jump in. Are you in the comments?
Yeah, it says add a destination to post comments.
Oh.
What does that mean?
Oh, I don't know. That's not what I see. You really can tell it's a live event. Okay, tell you what, go to the private message option, send it to me, and I will share it.
Easy. Done.
There we are. Look. Right. Copy that. And that is hitting the chat now.
Yay. Thank you.
And I'll put it on the screen as well. There we go.
Thank you.
So, any questions then? Let me stage up.
Holy shoot. Thank you. Thank you.
So this got me thinking about one thing, actually, just while we see if anyone else has questions. I kind of made the point that in all the time I've worked in the L&D space, predominantly here in the UK, I found that most of the people that I've worked with, for, and around do not have any kind of formal education or degree or anything like that in instructional design, learning and development, anything like that. Is that slightly different elsewhere? It's kind of difficult to tell, I guess.
I don't think so. I don't think that seems to be the general consensus. That even within their own teams sometimes, like their own managers sometimes, and that was definitely my experience. That's why I went down this path in the first place, because I had one too many managers and directors who had no idea what I actually did. And I was like, but you're my boss. You're supposed to be helping me. Right? Yeah.
Cool. And here we go. Here are some proper questions now, rather than it being me. Here we go. So, Elise, did you come across any themes around leading projects with highly difficult clients? No such thing as a difficult client, just a bad person running the project. And specifically clients who hold up the process because they don't understand or respect said process.
So one of the interesting things that I found was some trajectory between somebody talking about an unsuccessful project and then talking about a successful project, or vice versa. And they would do it themselves. I wouldn't prompt them, but they would say, they'd refer back to the other project that they talked about, right? And so one of the things was, when leading projects with highly difficult clients, confidence was key, right? So they would say, oh, well, you know, in the unsuccessful project, I didn't have the confidence to question this me or push back a little bit, or to fight for the actual intervention that I wanted to have. But in this successful project, I had a little more experience. I was more willing to step up and explain something, or fight for something. So yeah, that was a really interesting thing that people just kind of naturally talked about.
That's really interesting. And here we go. So, what would be the key takeaway message? If you could sum all that up in, 5 to 10 words for us.
I would say it's all right. No, it's good. I've done this many, many times now. This is like the version that I have to give people who don't really care, who can't be bothered to like read my whole dissertation, right? That collaborating with your SMEs and stakeholders is way more important than anybody is talking about, right? Like, it is so mission critical, and we're not talking enough about it. That's it.
Agree with that. Yeah, we've got a few minutes. Great review of the research, Heidi. Are there any themes or trends that really surprised you and that you wanted to dig further into and didn't discuss in detail here yet?
Yes. So a couple of things. Almost everyone I talked to, and I think it may have just been because I did the interviews from, let me think, June through December of 2020. And almost everyone I interviewed brought up COVID in some way, shape, or form as having some impact on the project. Only one person said that COVID ended their project. So I had like one outlier who said that the unsuccessful project was canceled because of COVID. But that was something where I was like, if I had more time, I'd go back through and look at everyone who mentioned COVID and how that impacted the projects. But also, like, everyone was doing that at the time. Like, there was so much research around it at the time. I was like, we're just going to leave this for now. But the other thing that I mentioned in my lit review that was just kind of weird to me was that all of the people who were talking about these leadership competencies were saying that they needed to happen in grad degree programs more. And they weren't saying why. And that's why I started asking people where they learned them, because I'm like, there's no real reason why this needs to be integrated into grad degree programs when it can be there and in practice and on teams, and we can be prepping L&D leaders to better support this. So that was something I just started to dig into by asking that question, where did you learn these skills? But really, I think it could be taken a lot further.
Fantastic. Well, anyone for any more questions? Now is the time. Heidi will refuse to speak to you after this. She's like that.
Mm-hmm. Never again. That's it.
Fantastic. Well, the Linktree link is in there. I would encourage you, if you can free up some time to go and read the whole thing. It's genuinely quite interesting.
Thank you.
And different to what we spend a lot of our time reading in L&D. We get a lot of blog posts and we get a lot of LinkedIn posts. We get the occasional Facebook post or tweet, which are always of the highest quality and entirely factual.
My favorite are the LinkedIn posts that are screenshots of the tweets.
Yeah, I'm not quite
Sorry, I
hip
had
enough and
to.
down enough with the kids for that. I'm afraid I can't quite get myself to that point. People have clearly had a
I
spurt
know
of
there's
interest. We've got
last minute
questions coming in.
questions.
Let's see if we can quickly get through them because I know you've got to go. If you've got
Yeah,
to
of
go,
course.
just say and
That's okay.
leave,
We're
and the
good.
chair can spin like a cartoon behind you. Anything to say on SMEs that insist on handing over complicated scripts instead of allowing L&D to organise the information?
I think it's one of those things again where it just becomes a matter of building that relationship, right? So if that happens when there's not really a lot of trust between you and the subject matter expert, or if you don't know them very well, right? So it's hard because you kind of have to build that relationship from the beginning, and you have to build that trust. And I don't know if it's that's another question that we can get into is like, how do we build trust with SMEs if we've never met them, or if we just get, here's your random SME, like, good luck, how do you start that relationship? How do you build that? How do you make that into a successful relationship? And I think that that's where they have to realize your expertise, but you also have to have built that trust that they see you as an expert.
Awesome. And I think the last question, don't send more questions in now because we won't have time. Were there any transitioning IDs that came from other fields, not L&D or academia, who mentioned skills acquired in previous jobs?
Pretty much everyone came from somewhere else. I'm not going to give you an exact number because I don't know it off the top of my head, but give me 1 second. Let me pull up, wait, it's over here on this other screen. Let me grab my dissertation really quick because yes, there is, hold on 1 second. Now I just have to find it.
See, this is the thing. If I had written a dissertation, there would be copies of it everywhere. I would never be without one to hand so that I could quote from it at a moment's notice.
That's great.
Uh...
So what is 7 out of 25? What's 7 times 4? 28. 28% of participants said that they got those leadership skills and those experience of how to run meetings, collaborate with people, those soft skills, right? 7 of them mentioned that they got that from previous roles that were non-instructional design. So, and those previous roles were all over the place. So.
Fantastic. Well, I think time is up.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone, for being so involved in the chat. Thank you, Heidi, for sharing such interesting work with us.
Of course.
I think
I'm excited to share it.
It's a rarity for us to get that kind of research-based stuff, and it's so nice to be looking at it. And that is it for day one of iDTX 2023. Thank you all very much for attending. Heidi kind of mentioned to me about how much this has grown over the last 3 years before our session started, and it really has. So thank you for making that happen, for turning up, for supporting, for posting about it on social media. It's very much appreciated. I know there are some people here as well who are our supporters on Patreon, so thank you so much to you as well for helping make this whole thing possible. Most of today's sessions are now available on YouTube. The rest will be going up in the next hour or so. So please feel free to make use of those and share them as widely as you would like to. But other than that, until tomorrow, have a lovely evening, and we shall see you then.